Bad and techie. Well, this week we're definitely going to focus on the bad because it's that time of the year where the spooky stuff comes out and where all the let's face it, because spooky stories are essentially how we relate shared trauma to each other. So what we're going to do is relate some of that shared trauma that we've seen in our own experiences, insecurity and infrastructure, in getting stuff done, in failing to get stuff done, and so on and so forth. So with that in mind, I'm VP of Engagement, Jon Collins.
And I'm CTO Howard Holton.
So let's do it.
Thank God we have that nice intro screen that says the good, the bad, and the techie, because neither one of us said this is the good, the bad, and the techie, I don't think.
This is the good, the bad, and the techie. Yep. Right, absolutely. So the horror stories start with trying to get the intro to this right every week, and
That's
never
true.
quite succeeding.
That's true. Well, it is October 31st for those who celebrate. That means it is Halloween. We thought it would be appropriate to maybe do a little bit of some technology scary stories. Ooh.
I feel I should have a kind of green background or something. Maybe Johnny, our producer, can sort some clever things in After Effects or something afterwards.
Oh, he's loving those comments. Yeah, Johnny, maybe you can do some neat effects and do some like flashes and some negatives and
I mean that's if we were going to go on to designers' worst nightmares. It's can you sort that in post? Pretty much it. Yeah. Get the automatic trauma response from that one. So where do we start on this? I mean, dear, there's so many. Where do we start? Can I just tell a quick story though?
Of course.
This, because a lot of my horror stories are to do with how I've completely dropped exactly what I was supposed to be holding up in the air, massively spectacularly, and often it's just after I've said something supremely confident and arrogant. And so one particular incident, I was working for a government establishment where everything had to be locked away and everything had to be turned off in the evening, and we had safes with codes to put hard drives away and all that jazz. And my boss was there and I was there and we were both working late, and I said to him, do you know, I think I've got this sorted out. I know exactly what's going on here. And the spiel was longer than that, but that's pretty much the essence of what I said. And I reached over as he was working on some big spreadsheet, and I turned off his computer at the wall. And it was the most fantastically painful popping of a balloon I've ever experienced. And I think back to that moment often when if I'm ever about to say, I haven't. I definitely haven't worked it out. No, definitely not. So that's a personal horror story. It's less about the tech and it's more about the tech's people issues, right?
Yeah. So I have one. This one was so much fun. So I had an alert on a system that a hard drive had failed. And the system wasn't hugely important. It just contained our accounting and billing system. So, not a high priority system to keep up and running. And I get the alert, and it's the first system that was stood up and was not virtualized when it was stood up. And we just never got around to virtualizing it. We figured, we'll do it when we replace the hardware. So I get in my car, I go to the data center, walk into the data center, find the label with the system on it, validate that everything's working great. All the lights are green. I got no alerts. I got nothing on the display. I go, must be some sort of anomaly. Right? Every other system is up and running. I don't have any alerts on anything else. It's really weird. I don't know what's going on, right? No. It was a real alert, but the systems were not labeled correctly. So when I thought I was looking at at one server, I was actually looking at another server, even though the label on it was, what I thought I was looking at.
There with that Dymo clicker didn't click.
Yeah.
Right number
yeah.
of clicks.
Some time goes on, and exactly what you would expect to happen happens. A second drive failure occurs, and the system is dead. No problem. We'll just restore from backup. Be back up in a couple of hours. I know this would work because we tested the restore process. Run through it, right? Has a SQL Server requirement. Install SQL, do the patching, do the restore. Restore failed. Install SQL, do the patching, do the restore failed. Day 2. Install SQL, do the patching, do the restore failed. Son of a bitch.
I know
Install
exactly the
SQL,
feeling that you have in your
patch a
stomach.
different level, do the restore. Day 3, update resume, reinstall SQL, do the patching, do the restore fails.
Oh Lord.
I'm in absolute panic. Okay, I'm talking to finance. They're like, well, we have annual manual backups. There's a way we can re-import those. We can reassemble transactions. It's going to be a lot of work, but if this is what we have to do, this is what we have to do. Thankfully, it was a small company, so we didn't have a billion transactions, so it was not completely unreasonable to do this. Finally, I go, let me take another swing at it. Reinstall SQL, install a different patch level, do the restore works, everything's back up and running in an hour. Yes. And that's what I learned. 1, always update your effing documentation. And 2, if you have to update the documentation, you probably also need to test your backup and restore process again and make sure that it works as well. Right? Like the once every 3 years of testing your restore process, even though you don't think the application fundamentally changed and the process fundamentally changed, could still save you days when things go wrong. And somewhere in my head, I have this one shock of white hair. My wife can find it. I've never actually seen it because it's in my head and I don't have eyes there. That shock of white hair appeared during that week. My level was so insanely high. For sure I was going to get fired. And my company was like, no, like, look, stuff happens. We know you're working your ass off to get it repaired. And I eventually did get it repaired and then fixed the process to make sure it didn't happen again. But yeah, that was an incredibly stressful week. After that week, we had nothing where the backups weren't tested thoroughly, and we had nothing that wasn't virtualized.
As an old colleague of mine, Tony, used to say, he probably still does, companies don't need a backup strategy; they need a restore strategy.
100%. Backup is
restore
easy.
strategy that needs to be kept up to date.
Yeah, backup is easy. Restore is hard.
You ain't. We wrote a little. We did a thing for Fujitsu years and years ago, but we had a quote from some old country singer on it, which is something like, "You don't know you got it until you lost it."
Yeah. One of my all-time favorites is success pays, failure educates. Right? Honestly, you learn very little from success. It just reaffirms that whatever you did last time, you should try again. But you learn a ton from failure.
Yeah, particularly how fallible things are. I mean, you learn that failure exists, and that's not a kind of completely glib statement. It's as long as you're thinking that everything's naively going to just work, you're never looking for the bad. You're always just skipping along. Everything's fine. But you need to have that kind of, no, we do need to think about what happens if things go wrong. What you were talking about there, it reminded me a bit of a theory that I didn't learn until probably 5 years ago. So well into the third decade of my career, which was the Swiss cheese theory of risk, which I think came from airline safety. But it essentially, for the record, for those that didn't know it, because I didn't, it doesn't matter if you have lots of little problems. It's when all those problems line up so you can see straight through the cheese. That's when the disasters happen. And it is the label on the server being wrong, the version of the patch not being the absolute one that was going to work with the thing you were trying to restore, etc., etc. It's all those little things coming together.
Yeah, I like the Swiss cheese view as well, right? Because when you start to break down security, there's no such thing as perfect security, right? But when you take your layered approach, make sure that the holes don't line up, right? Make sure that layer 1 and layer 2 don't have the same architectural issues, the same flaws, the same blank spaces. Then add layer 3, then add layer 4, then add layer 5, until what started as individual slices of Swiss cheese are now a block that you cannot see through. Right?
And you have, there's nowhere to go with that. There's no light shining through that cheese.
Yeah. All right, John, it's your turn. You got a story you want to share?
Okay, so well, I guess the most horrific, which didn't involve me, although I had to fix it with the team, was back when I was running Unix systems, and we came in one morning and found there was no data on any server ever. None of them. All we had to go on was one of the servers still had a log file that said file not found, file not found, file not found. And that was it. It was just kind of, and it was still tinkering away with that. And that took a lot of unpacking and unwrapping and working out what the heck had gone on before we could even restore the data. But it turned out that through the wonders of forensic science, a little bit of hindsight, and several years later, I worked out what had actually happened, which was a rogue script. And it was a rogue script. And if anyone knows Unix, if you run RSH to run a script on another server from where you are, and if you set up the permissions just to make it easy so you can run remote scripts, that's all fine and dandy, but it plays with escape characters. So if you want to run a command within a script line, which is in quotes, it'll strip those things out and leave you with just the characters. So the long and the short was, if anyone's familiar with the expression RM minus RF, we had an issue that someone in the company had thought it was really cool to hide pornographic materials that they were downloading from the nascent internet in directories called things like space dot or dot space. And they were hiding them in hierarchies that was something like dot space / space dot. So you could never find it. But if you put that string together and then you try and run a let's remove those directories remotely, the first thing you do is you remove dot, which is the current directory. The next thing you do is you remove /, which is all the directories, all the folders and all the files. And then the next thing you do is you try and remove dot again, which of course then results in file not found, directory not found, whatever. The only evidence I had was on one of our admins' whiteboards. You could just about make out this half-written script that had kind of experimented with a different way of running this thing across all the servers ever. And so all the data went, everything, every last bit.
That's because the character was not a space. It was Alt 255, if I remember my ASCII correctly. That's
schoolboy error. I know, right?
Right.
So, I mean, fortunately, we had optical backups. We had a jukebox of these optical drives. And so having got everything essentially reinstalled into our servers from scratch. So we had lovely clean servers, to be fair. We then had to reinstall all the databases, reinstall all the file systems, reinstall all the files, etc. And we got most of it back. It was a development environment. So the ultimate thing was code that we were losing. So we got 98% of it back, which was a big relief. Yeah, that was a scary one. That was a really scary one, given the fact that it was an administrator that could do it as well.
Right.
So the whole thing about people management and testing anything that you do before you run it on an entire environment of hundreds of people, etc. That, to your point, experience and lessons and problems and failure. Lots of lessons learned there about tech, about people, about process, yada yada yada.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing like like an emergency to make you realize that your process that you thought was okay is woefully insufficient for things that really kind of should be obvious, right? Like like that one, hey, we're going to run a command that is one of the most dangerous commands you could run. What is our testing procedure around doing so? Right?
Mhm.
Probably like afterwards, everyone just kind of goes, oh, yeah, we should have thought about that. It was so obvious.
And to be fair, back then, I mean, when we got it was all sun. It was the sun environment. So when we got a new SS5 or SS10 or whatever it was being delivered, they would there was no security controls on them. Yeah, they were, anonymous FTP was left wide open. You could wander into those servers anytime you like, run whatever you liked, pretty much, as long as you knew what to do. And the first job we had to do was close everything down, shut all the back
For
doors.
sure.
Um, and so, and things like sudo didn't exist. Super user do didn't exist
Right.
back then. I think that only came in with Linux. So the super user was pretty much God when it came to running commands, and a lot of that isn't as easy now, which is the com- the providers have locked down a lot of things to make it harder for people to do stupid.
I mean, thankfully, we've started to think about how security is important, right?
Wow. Yeah.
Shocker, shocker. That actually brings up a recommendation I'd like to give our listeners. When you hear a vendor talk about security, they tend to talk about security in features and functionality they've added to their platform. That is not even half the story,
Mm.
right? Ask them how they develop their applications with security in mind. Where does security fit into their process, not their product? Is a much more useful question and a much more important question in today's day and age. It's great that you've given us all these functions that allow us to configure security, but how do I know the code that you are producing in the product produces a secure product? What are you doing to validate that? How are your teams built with security in mind? It's a really
Mm.
good question to ask. So, I get another story. This is from the days when Active Directory was new and we were running NT4 domains. So I had an NT4 domain, small domain, 25,000 users, right? For those who know, there was a kind of an upper limit of things you wanted in a single domain. Um, I was a data center manager for a major organization, and that meant I was on the on-call rotation. However, I was 65 miles from the location, so I was not high on the call rotation. So I get a call at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I answer. And as I'm sure you guess, I was extremely awake and cognizant at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And so once I got through the who's what do you want? Why are you calling me? What I found out was as 10th, 11th, or 12th on the call list, no one else had answered the phone, and I needed to get into my car and drive 65 miles because the entire network was down, and they couldn't figure out why every single login was being denied.
Mhm.
So I get up on site, bang on the door, get let into the building, explain why I'm there, work with the networking team to figure out where what's going on. We identify that there's a rogue domain controller that is denying all requests. Track it to a port, track the port to the third party vendor that did all the desktop management that I also happen to work for. And it was the desktop room that was locked. I didn't have keys to that. I'm not part of that team. And of course,
Mhm.
that manager's not answering. None of his people that have keys are answering. Right. So, okay, cool. We disable the port 35-ish seconds, right? Whatever the login timeout happens, the priority timeout happens, all the logins start working again. Come to find out, one of the desktop technicians was trying to learn Active Directory. So took a decommissioned desktop, stuck it under his desk, plugged in the network, installed Windows 2000, created a new Active Directory domain, And in order to not ruffle any feathers, named it the domain the same as our corporate NT4 domain name. Since Active Directory has a higher Kerberos priority, that domain controller became the master domain controller for the domain for every client that attempted to connect.
Yeah.
So every client was attempting to connect to a desktop that they didn't, for a domain they didn't belong to and had no rights to, that sat underneath his desk, and had everybody down for I don't know how many hours, because no one from that team would respond. And they just kind of wandered in, right at about the same time they would wander in every morning going, "Hey, I got a bunch of alerts. What's going on?" Well, we're about to use a chainsaw to cut through the door.
Oh boy. I mean, so yeah, just a little race condition on the, well, why would I want to work with the huge, great big Active Directory service? Why don't I just use this desktop? It's closer.
Yeah. I had another one at the same data center that's kind of funny. We had a lease line provisioning. Like, we went from, I think it was like ISDNs and T1s to lease to I think we were doing fiber optic lease lines at the time, right, to get some real bandwidth. And the vendor's technician came out to remove the old equipment and provision the new equipment, right? Got the new equipment provisioned. The old one had been deprecated for a while, so we weren't currently using that line. He's like, "All right, I'm going to go ahead and pull the equipment." He pulls the equipment, and this data center had been around for 20 years, and so cable management was not a thing anyone ever even remotely considered. And the power cable couldn't be removed because someone had decided to put it through a single, like the space of a screw hole. For those who remember racks, right? So the brick, the block on the power cable couldn't go through the space, and he went, "I'm just going to cut this so I could pull it out." Okay, did you unplug the other? Brrr, killed the entire rack, which had all of the connectivity equipment, because at the time there was no redundancy to most of those connections.
Amazing.
Right? Brought the entire network down again. Now, the best part about bringing that network down was we had 55,000-ish VAX users, for those who remember DEC VAX. You had to manually clear the connections so that people could log back in if they got summarily disconnected.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, top work.
It took hours. It was hilarious too. I'm like, dude, you have one job. You couldn't check and make sure that the other side of the cable was unplugged before you just cut it? Like, yeah. So it's one of a few times where a third party has been fired while I was standing there.
As someone that's switched things off without checking, I've already revealed my hand on this one. But cutting a cable, that does remind, because I used to do. I mean, somehow they made me a trained auditor. So I used to do security audits and pen testing, but also just walking around buildings and with a clipboard and looking for things that. And top tip, world, it's not. You never have to look very hard, and generally, you're kind of looking for you're looking for the detail. You're looking through the logs to see how well things have been kind of written down and so on and so forth. But it just reminded me of the going to a data center, and you're looking at it from this side. You go, yeah, that all looks really secure and so on and so forth. What's that door open at the back over there? So we go through, and the door's been propped open by a fire extinguisher of the entire data center to the outside, to the parking lot. Because why? Because it gets too warm in there. Mm-hmm. So they wanted to let some fresh air in. So this entire, multi-million building that has been created with security in mind, fire extinguisher, parking lot, anyone could just walk in, kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, my top tip for anybody is don't worry too much about the detail. Just look for the stupid, because the stupid overrides any amount of detail every time.
Well, I mean, sometimes you have to prop the back door to the data center open because you're not allowed to smoke on the floor.
I mean, it's logical,
right? One of my favorite data centers.
Logical.
Oh yeah, one of my favorite data center stories. I go to my data center, and it's a hosted data center, right? So there's a bunch of clients in there. This one did not happen to anything that I owned, but everybody is like standing around the security display, and I'm like, guys, like what the hell is going on? And they're like, you've got to see this. So someone had hired movers to move a cabinet, a server cabinet, right? And they're rolling it up the ramp, top loaded. Right? So all the equipment is in the top of the rack, and they're rolling it up a ramp, and exactly what you would expect to happen happened, with a human being underneath the cabinet as it tipped over and fell. And like a cartoon, you have one guy still standing up while the other guy is under it, going like this, trying to get unstuck.
Why do I feel a literal visceral response to all of your stories today? Actually, that brings me to a thing. And I was thinking about this earlier when you were talking about things like 0-day attacks and things like big failures and so on and so forth. If you haven't done it, anyone out there, do a simulation, because it's really strange how the response, the body response and all that, and the psychological response of suddenly being faced with a problem that you can't solve, and then how to deal with that as a team and so on and so forth. It really does. We need to have those synapses firing. So to do it in a simulation. Everyone I know that's ever done that sort of thing has just said, "Oh wow, what an amazing experience! I had no idea what my reaction was going to be, and it wasn't as good as I hoped." And I've really learned a great deal. I never expected to be that drawn into the whole situation. So do it. Get someone in to do it. Do it as a fun thing. Do it as a kind of do it as a paper exercise. Whatever. Just do it.
Yeah. I have a friend who's a retired lieutenant colonel from the Air Force, who ran those simulations for the Air Force, is currently a professor at University of Colorado, and he studies liminality. Liminality is the point at which the brain no longer understands when something is not real and sees it as real. It's effectively what it is, and it is amazing. Yeah, hopefully I just introduced a bunch of people to a whole new concept. It is really amazing how the human brain, even knowing things are a simulation, when the simulation is done properly, reacts very similarly to how it would if it was real.
Mhm.
Right? In the same way we tense up to a car crash in a movie theater. We know that's fake. We know that's not real. Right? But make sure that you do that, because you're looking for two things. The first is you're looking for a personality of a person that runs towards danger, not away from danger. Right? When the flight or fight kicks in, they fight, they don't flight. You as a leader need to know who those people are. And then the second thing you're looking for is, while you may have 60 people that understand their jobs really, really, really well, how well do they hand off? Right? How long do they try to solve a problem on their own, as though they're this own little island that's working by themselves, before they turn to the person who is the SME on that thing, hand off? And then how quickly are they ready to take it back when it is their turn again? Right? We do a really, really good job of training individuals. We do a really good job of rewarding individuals. We don't do a really good job of building teams and establishing team dynamics. And those are the two things you really need to get out of those simulations. Right? You need to understand your risk. And those are the two places where in an emergency, you will find the most risk. It's not that someone doesn't answer the phone. Right? The risk that you're really going to find is, once you're on the ground, do you have people that run away from the danger or run towards it? Right? A non-standard fear response is what you're looking for.
You're
and
right.
do you have people that don't know how to hand off?
And in the team dynamics thing, if it is forming, storming, norming, performing, you really don't want to go through that at the moment you're trying to fix this really messy situation. It's
No.
far better to have done the storming day before.
Yeah. And you don't actually have to run a simulation that is a simulation of the thing you're trying to do to get to those results. There's all kinds of other simulations that you can run that are fun and exciting and interesting. And you can still measure the same result. You can still get similar value from it. Sure, you're not going to test your policies and procedures, but you are going to build that team dynamic. You are going to see who your leaders are. You are going to see who runs at it, right? All the things that you're really looking for, you're still going to see. So I do recommend do those things. Take the time, take the effort. And if there's anything, John or I can do to help, even point you in the right direction, feel free to reach out.
What a great note to finish on.
Yeah, with that, this has been The Good, The Bad, and The Techie. We hope you've enjoyed being here as much as we've enjoyed telling these stories. I hope, it's really easy for us to get on this podcast and seem like we're experts and wizards, but the reality is we got here by learning the hard way, right? As I say, success pays, failure educates. So hopefully you'll join us next week. Like, subscribe, share, comment, ask questions. If you want to be a guest and come on and tell stories and talk about technology, reach out to John or I, and we'd love to have you. So again, I'm Howard Holton.
Jon Collins.
And we'll see you on the next episode.
Sure will.